Of all the games I didn't include in my top 10 games that made Snek, this is probably the one I feel should have been on that list that wasn't. Probably should have taken the Secret of Mana slot if we're being perfectly honest. Oh well. Let's build a city. Welcome everyone, I am Mayor Snek of the humble city of Snekberg, yeah. Today we'll be looking at the incredibly popular sim game that sired them all, SimCity. Originally debuting in 1989 under the guiding hand of Will Wright and unmolested by EA Games at the time, this title not only launched the simulator genre as we understand it today, it was also on just about every platform in existence at the time. For convenience's sake, I'll be recording from the Super Nintendo version, which is just one of many that I owned as a kid. I also had a copy on some old PCs for both Windows 3.1 and Windows 95. While there are minor differences between each of these ports, the basic concept remains the same. You take the role of mayor and city council, really, as you set down locations for power plants, zoning, 3 convenient flavors of, and eventually shepherding your little town into a full-on city status with sea and airports to expand commercial and industrial efforts. If all goes well, you'll even be able to afford full-on luxuries like your own city's sports stadium where they can play some sports ball, or even casinos to help bring in some bonus income every tax season. Broadly speaking, SimCity is a brightly colorful game with a cheery atmosphere, even as tornadoes and Godzilla, or in this case Bowser, crash through your densely populated residential zones. Heck, the zones themselves are split up by color codes, residential being red, industrial being yellow, and commercial zones being blue. Green trees and blue rivers dot the landscape, with white snowfall powdering the land when winter comes, and eventually silver skyscrapers will dot your cityscape provided you take good care of it. It just looks sharp. A densely packed city will certainly involve some attention to detail, especially as the zones build up. And audibly, most versions of SimCity don't have particularly robust soundtracks, given that many of them were offered on machines that, didn't have speakers. But for the sake of our comparison, let's touch on the SNES version, as it's quite distinct. I actually quite like the music in this version in particular. It's very soothing, gives you a sense of serenity for the most part, with a natural exception of when disasters hit, and panic music cues giving the player the proper sense of urgency. It's good stuff all around. Of note is Mr. Wright's theme, a green-haired assistant exclusive to the Super Nintendo version, who was loosely modeled on Will Wright himself and has since gone on to become an assist trophy in Super Smash Bros. Installments. Let's touch on the gameplay next. The game is broadly broken into 2 main modes, City Mode and Scenario Mode. Scenario is a bit easier to explain, so let's begin with that. In each, you're given a city and a task to handle, usually a disaster of some kind. Some among these are even based on actual historical events. The idea in each being that you'll handle whatever situation is given to you, and then the subsequent rebuilding in the wake thereof. These include San Francisco's earthquake of 1906, Burns traffic in 1965, a Tokyo monster attack set in 1961, no idea what that could be a reference to, Detroit's crime rate in 1972, and a hypothetical nuclear meltdown in Boston in the futuristic year of, 2010, and then possible coastal flooding in Rio de Janeiro in 2047. You're given a limited budget of both money and time, and you're set to the task of bringing the city back to its prosperity. Clear it within the time, you'll have it checked off the list. Of course, you can actually cheat in the latter two, courtesy of holding the L button stopping time from progressing. You can then bulldoze the offending power plants and smooth out the coastlines, which will actually prevent either of these actually ever occurring, and then you just get to ride it out to an easy win. Though the precise criteria for winning in some of these cases is left a little bit vague. More interesting, to me at least, is the city building mode, where you're given one of 1,000 possible maps, a necessary limitation of the Super Nintendo I have to assume, and some mixture of land and water, selecting a budget, and then you get to the task of building your own city. Naturally, you're limited by money and the rotation of tax season, which sets in on the new year, subtracting from tax revenue what the city owes in terms of upkeep of roads, fire, and police services. In many ways, the simulation lacks a certain je ne sais quoi, stemming from the fact that you can't take bribes or launder money. I suppose the limitations of video games make it so that we're playing the role of the world's most honest politician. Another restriction is overall map size, something that will plague the series for all of its life within some degree or the other. but you're given more than enough room to make a bustling city for your denizens. And the game tracks your efforts as you plop down your first power station in the game's opening year of 1900. And somehow one of the options available is nuclear power even. I choose not to question this, as nuclear power doesn't contribute to pollution unlike industrial zones, so that's pretty cool. Next you plop down your first zones, residential so people have a place to live, and industrial and commercial so said people have a place to work. You then set up some power lines and roads and maybe a railway, and you're on your way to city status. While SimCity does work great as an educational tool, I admit it was a little above my understanding as a kid. While picking up and playing the game is fine, subtle nuances like not setting the residential zone directly next to industrial smokestacks was sort of lost on me. And tracking things like crime rates and pollution is done by means of charts and graphs, which I can safely assure you little Snek was not that big on. As an adult, it's much clearer to me now, because I am well-read nerd rather than just a nerd. The game really gave me an appreciation for how a lack of planning can result in cities with confusing layouts, or how an overly planned city can result in horrifically inefficient wheel and spoke designs, among other things. Or how pressing the fine line between infrastructure and government funding can really look when you're in the hot seat. It can be a very eye-opening experience for people, I think. However, that doesn't mean you can always do something about the issues that you learn of. Chief among these is even when fully funded, police stations seem to have a pathetically tiny area of effect across the map. And traffic jams are just flat out inevitable no matter how much in the way of roads and rails are open to your citizens. And there will just be times that you build up as much as you can, run out of money, set the game speed on high, and just sit on your hands. It's actually rather difficult to cue a true game over in this game, but it's not too hard to get stuck into an unmoving rut either, where you get maybe $50 back in your coffers while doing everything in your power to win. When that happens, it might be time to open the disasters menu and take a magnifying glass to this particular offending anthill, if you get my drift. Assuming you surmount the initial obstacles that can put the brakes on your efforts, you'll eventually unlock additional bonus buildings, including money makers like casinos and sports stadiums, which will add bonus revenue to the vault, and when you can, you should, since buildings like the library or park areas barely add any more bonuses to your city than the $10 park squares near residential zones do. It's a mercenary tactic, sure, but you gotta look at the big picture. There is no worse feeling than being stuck in neutral, so full speed ahead, I say. Now, hypothetically speaking, you might get your map completely maxed out, with a perfectly balanced city between the three zones and all the charts idealized. Well, I'm glad you managed it, because I never have. Once you hit that potential upper limit, it might be time to try the game on a harder difficulty. The way the game tracks things is the same in each, just that you start with smaller opening budget. Maybe you can try launching your outpost town with a coal power plant instead of a nuclear one. Try out different road maps and see how each gets treated. Maybe actually get traffic under control. Good luck with that one in particular. Oh, and here's an entertaining story for you. My sister missed her calling as a game beta tester because she found a logical exploit in the game. Right before the game queues up the tax time, she would pause and enter the menu and jack the tax rate to its maximum value of 20%. Tax time would come before the citizens could become disgusted with this treatment and leave, so the maximum cash flow would enter the coffers. Whereupon she would then immediately drop it down to 0% and the population would resume booming. And yeah, that trick does work in several other SimCity installments, I tried it. So all these years later, how does it hold up? I'll be honest, I spent most of my childhood actually playing the sequel SimCity 2000, so this iteration does feel pretty simple by comparison. But even for a very simplistic simulation, SimCity does a good job at satisfying that part of my brain that enjoys building up something little by little. And getting unfettered authority to decide how an entire town is assembled, and watching it grow and balancing its needs, is a uniquely satisfying feeling that brings me back to the Maxis titles over and over again, even 20 years after my initial introduction to them. There is a reason why SimCity is considered one of the greatest games of all time, and you won't hear me ever trying to take that title away from it. This has been the City Snek. If you liked what you saw today, please hit that like button to let me know. If you want more like this each week, definitely tap the subscribe and bell icons down below. And if you want me to talk about other Maxis titles, let me know which ones are your favorites in the comments. You can hit me up on Twitter or the brand new Tumblr page, links available in the description. Join me regularly over on the Tomodachi Bros Review YouTube page for bi-weekly fresh content. Join me here every week for more obscure reviews, indie excellence, Snek talks, and more. And I'll see you there.